Everyone, and welcome to another video. I'm Simply G, and today I'm going to be showing off all of the manga and light novels and stuff that I got for this month, November 2020. There's quite a bit here, more than I expected. I think that's kind of the theme for this month. Yeah, so rather than spend too much time on this intro, I'm gonna get straight into it, and I hope you guys enjoy. So first up, I have some art books to show off. One of these was newly released, and I pre-ordered it. But there was previous books from this artist that had been released years ago. I'd been meaning to get for a while, so I decided to place an order for those from Mandarake at the same time. And so I received all three of them this month, and that is Natsume Iguchi's art books for what's his name? Hozuki's Cool-Headedness. So this is the first one. This is a colored art book, or featuring colored art. And I will have I've already filmed and will post a art book overview of this. I also got, and this is the pre-ordered one that I got this month, the second of these, because this is a recently completed series in Japanese, not in English. It's been many a year since we've had a volume of this released digitally from Kodansha. So this is the second of those, and then I also got the cover art collection, which I don't know if that's quite the right term, but this is all black and white artwork, again from Iguchi in relation to this series. And yeah, I also have a upcoming art book overview for this one and the second one as well. So yeah, I really like Hozuki's Cool-Headedness. I really like Iguchi's art style, and I've been meaning to get these forever, honestly, and so I finally just bit the bullet, especially with the second one having just been released, and got the other two. Next, we're going to start with manga, and there was a lot of debuts this month, or last month, or whenever these came out. I can never quite tell because it always takes forever for stuff to get to me. We know this. But some of these I did buy locally, which was exciting, from my local comic store. But I think I mentioned last month I am wanting to be a patron to more often than not, rather than buying things online, just because I want to support them and also get my manga immediately. It does cost, more, but it's nice to have that immediacy of a book in your hand. And unfortunately, compared to the US especially, Australia doesn't have a huge amount of manga, or especially non-viz manga or non-mainstream shonen manga in typical normal bookstores. And whilst I don't have an issue, and I do follow some of those series, I'd rather just wait for a sale for those ones. They're very often not high priority, whereas some of the other stuff that this comic store has isn't in other bookstores, for one, and is normally higher priority for me to buy for two. So yeah, the first one being the first omnibus of Blue Giant by Shinichi Ishizuka. This is it's a completed series, but technically it's ongoing because it has two sequels. So there's Blue Giant and there's Blue Giant Supreme, which are both completed series, but then there's another one that follows Supreme that is still, I think it's just started, so that one's ongoing. And this follows a kid called Dai who plays the tenor sax, and he wants to become a jazz musician. He wants to become the greatest jazz musician in the world. And so he was introduced to jazz through one of his middle school friends, and he kind of didn't really get it initially, but then they went to a live show, an actual jazz show at a club, and it just hit him, and he absolutely fell in love with jazz, and most notably the saxophone. So it's about him practicing and improving and trying to be the best jazz musician there is, it kind of feels a little bit like Beck, obviously another music series, very different musical genre from Beck, but it's an amateur who's kind of just finding his place in the music world, and very much self-taught for a majority of this book. But despite not having any like formal coaching or teaching, he's not particularly good. He has pretty bad form and he can't read music, stuff like that. But regardless, his passion, his emotion, the way he expresses himself through his saxophone and through his music, and an extension of that, is just captivating. And so many people who he's come across really sees the potential and the genius and like the emotionality of him, and really connect to his music, and expect, hopefully, with the future of him improving and learning more, that he'll just get better and better and better, and other people will see him for the talent that he has. I didn't really know what to expect with this series. I had high hopes for it. I heard it was good. It's won a ton of awards in Japan. I do think there's always an issue with music manga in that, like, obviously there's no sound in manga, so it's up to your own brain to kind of put in the music where you can't hear it. And I think maybe for some manga fans that may be hard. How many people are that familiar with jazz? I don't know. Like, I grew up with jazz because my parents are old people, and so, so I am familiar with a lot of the songs and the artists or musicians that they reference in this series. So, like, I can get kind of a feel for the musicians that he loves, and they're not unknown. Like, if you know any jazz musicians, there's probably some in here that are referenced that you will know, right? But if you're just completely disconnected from jazz and from this kind of area of music, then maybe it'll be a little bit harder to get or understand or do that substitution in your brain whilst you're reading as to what this music or what this sound actually sounds like. Jazz is cool. Like, I do like jazz. As I said, I grew up with a lot of it. It's not my favorite musical genre, but it's pretty dang cool. And it's nice to see Dai's passion in that, and how he introduces jazz to his friends and how they interact with it and how they support him. He is surrounded by supportive people, especially his family. His mother died like 10 or so years prior, but his dad and his older brother especially are absolutely like 100% behind him and his passions, especially because they realize that this is what he wants to do and this is like who he wants to be. And it's refreshing. It's really nice. And seeing his friends as well, like, realize that he's very serious about this. Even though he's kind of a straightforward guy. He doesn't really have, like, a calculating side or anything like that. So they understand that when he says that he wants to be the best jazz musician in the world, like, he means it. He means it, and he's being serious. And so, again, they are very supportive of that. But that doesn't mean that he doesn't come up against, defeat or failure or anything like that throughout the series. So, yeah, it's also, like, as I said, I didn't really know what to expect going into the series. It does feel like, at least with this first volume, like, each chapter, it's not quite a immediately ongoing plot throughout it. We kind of just see important moments and things throughout this kid's life. So you know, it feels so like it kind of not jumps around. That's not quite right, but it kind of skips over unnecessary stuff, and so it may feel like it's just kind of like speeding through things, or a lot is happening per chapter, but each chapter is quite self-contained. And then at the end of each volume in this omnibus, we have, I guess, the reflections from characters that are introduced in these volumes on the events that happen in these books, but from a point of many years down the line where presumably Dai has become a jazz musician, a very popular jazz musician, and talking about their first encounters with this kid, and how his life and his music kind of shaped them and their first impression of it. It's an interesting way to do it. Yeah, I did like this quite a bit. I will definitely be continuing to pick it up. If you like music manga, especially if you like jazz music or saxophone music as well, tenor saxes are a very cool instrument. I had a very good friend who played the tenor sax, and she was amazing. But yeah, so Blue Giant, definitely worth the read. Check it out. I know that it was probably a highly requested title for 7 Seas, and it's not for everyone. I won't say like everyone has to read this, but if you are interested in it and you like the premise and you like music manga or music series in general, then check it out. I don't think you'll be too disappointed. Following that, we have another debut focusing on the arts and individuals who are incredibly passionate about what they want to do and going in a direction in life that may seem counterintuitive to a lot of people's expectations for themselves. And this is another series that I was highly anticipating because I've heard nothing but good things. I'm pretty sure this has won a bunch of awards as well. And this is the first volume of Blue Period by Tsubasa Yamaguchi, which is about a high school kid who's kind of like, he doesn't quite fit anywhere. He hangs out with delinquents and he looks like he's got the bleached hair and a bunch of piercings and things, but he's a really good student. He studies really hard. His mom has told him, like, we can't afford a private school, so get into a good school and study either in a public school so we don't have to worry. And so he has a kind of a balanced home life, but he's stuck in the middle of like not really knowing who he is because of that. He's never felt that attached to himself, to what he's doing, and so he doesn't even really know who he is. But one day, during his art class, he is given a project the class is given a project where they have to draw their favorite view. And so he decides, like I think a lot of kids, or a lot of people, especially those who, and I will admit that to an extent this was myself in high school, those who are so focused on studying and getting into a good school and getting into a career that will guarantee success, that will, give you stability and this, that, whatever else. He sees art as kind of superfluous. There's the presumption that you're never going to make any money, that artists, there's a reason that the phrase starving artist exists. And so he's never taken art very seriously, but he takes the opportunity whilst being given this project to do it properly, to, take it seriously. And so he paints and draws his favorite view, which is Shibuya in the early morning, where everything just seems blue to him. It's a beautiful pale blue, And it's something that he's experienced many times because he and his friends, you know, go out partying and drinking a lot. And they, you know, they walk home through Shibuya whilst everything is closed to get home in the very early mornings, like 4:30, 5 o'clock, where that dawn light is just hitting the city and everything is painted blue. And so through that, he submits that and he gets praised for it. He has people saying like, wow, it's really well done. And also people like recognizing that that's what he's depicting. And that praise, that recognition of himself and something that he really loves through his artwork just triggers something in his mind of like, maybe this is who I am. Maybe this is who I want to be. And it just ignites this passion in him. And it's beautifully done. I really, really loved this first volume. But of course there's also his internal struggle because, as I said, he's been studying so hard for so many years to get into a really good school. He doesn't want to let his mom down. And so, you know, he has the conflict of like, it's irresponsible for me to go to art school because I can't, like, there's no guarantee that I'll get in. There's only one public art school in Japan, I think, full stop. So all of the other ones are private, and the only public one is the most competitive school in Japan, especially the most competitive art school, but even more so than like the actual just general universities. It's incredibly hard to get in, very few places. And so if he's wanting to follow his newfound passions and to become an artist, he has to just be here. He has to really dedicate himself wholly and fully to his art. It's it's so good. It's so good. I knew that I'd probably enjoy this, and it did not let me down. He also has a classmate, they're not friends, called Yuka-chan, who, I don't know if it's been clarified as to whether they're trans or non-binary. Our main character calls them Ryuji, which is their name, but they wear the kind of a mix and match of the female and male uniforms. They have very long hair. They don't present themselves as male, but typically they present themselves as female. And all of the other who is part of the art club, and all of the art club members call her Yuka-chan. And I don't know if it hasn't said blatantly, specifically, whether or not, as I said, they are trans girl or non-binary. That either or, it doesn't really matter. But for our main character, that was kind of the only person that he had a reference to in the art club, up until he joins himself. And so he has kind of a rocky relationship with this person, but I do think that they will become closer friends over time. And interestingly, his what's it called? Discipline, that's the word, that he's hoping to go into is oil painting, which is a dang difficult thing to do. But yeah, it's really, really lovely. And like with the other series, I didn't really mention it a huge amount with Blue Giant, but it's really a focus on like the hard work versus talent dichotomy, because there are people who are talented, right? But it's those who dedicate themselves and practice and apply themselves every single day and put in those hard work that see the most improvement and can be the most successful, because the thing about talent is you can be naturally inclined to be good at something, but if you just rest on your laurels and think like, oh, I'm so good at this, I don't need to improve, very often the case is that after time there will be people who didn't have that innate talent, who are better than you, or are very successful because they are more passionate. They want to succeed. They want to improve, and so they are able to do so, and they overtake that just innate raw talent. And that's something that's brought up very, very often, and very seriously in this particular series, and I love that. I love that for them. And also another series with a pretty supportive family. Our character doesn't really know it at this point, but his family, or his mother especially, is more supportive of his art dreams than he's aware. But yeah, and also really great art teacher in this series, who is realistic. Like, she doesn't nonsense these kids. She's upfront about everything, and she seems like someone who actually understands art. I mean, hopefully you want that, but who is teaching these kids art because she's so passionate about it, and it's not just an arbitrary additional thing, like, oh, I couldn't make it as an artist, and thus I am now a teacher, which is that's a sad way to look at teaching anyway. We know this, but yeah, it's really nice to see, and it's reflective of the series as a whole, the realism, the reality of being an artist, and how art is undervalued, but despite that, the competitive nature of being an artist, and also the hugely vast variety of art that can be created, and disciplines in art. It's really good. It's so good. And yeah, another wonderful series from Kodansha that I'm really looking forward to reading more of. And obviously, I'm sure the title is a reference to Picasso's Blue Period, which, if you're not familiar, is when Picasso, in just the early 20th century, just all of his paintings were done in shades of blue, and it's called his Blue Period. I don't know if that's maybe, well, I mean, obviously our main character, his painting was blue as well, so maybe it's evocative of that. But anyway, great series, check it out. Next, another Kodansha debut with The Witch and the Beast by Kosuke Satake. I talked about this one in my weekly wrap-up live stream. This is the story of two individuals, these characters on the front, Gaido and Ashaf, I think is his name, who... So the whole setting is in this world where magic exists and witches exist, and witches are not good. They're evil, they're bad, they cause havoc, trouble. They just not a great time to be hanging around if you're with a witch. And so Gaido and Ashaf go around and basically fight and defeat or round up witches as part of their job, where they work for, I think it's a group, some sort of ministry that solves magical issues, problems that people have been having in society. But it's more of a personal thing when it comes to witches for Gaido, because she has been inflicted with a witch's curse, which has put her into this particular body. Because when she breaks the curse, she doesn't look like that. Let's put it that way. Okay, if you like feral female characters, then you will love this series. It's on the back, and I said this in the main, in my wrap-up video, they compare it, and I think it's because obviously it's a Kodansha title, and these are also Kodansha titles, but they compare it to for fans of Noragami and Holic, of dark fairy tales, and it's definitely a dark fairy tale style of story. I would more so compare it to something like D. Gray Man. It's more of a Western fantasy fairy tale setting compared to what I see as an Eastern fairy tale or supernatural setting with Noragami and Holic. It doesn't. It has dark aspects. There's a lot of action, a lot of violence. It is certainly a dark fairy tale. Like, that's it lives up to that. But it doesn't have the same sort of Eastern feel to it or Asian feel to it that those titles do. I would say that it's more so in line with something like The Grey Man or even Pandora Hearts. Those sorts of settings versus Noragami. But yeah, so we have our main characters who are looking for the witch that has cursed Gaido into her current form. Oh, look at her fangs. As I said, she's like Gaido. If you like punk rock girls, foul-mouthed, just totally willing to beat you up, then I think you will love this series. And then Ashaf, her partner, is the very smooth-talking, pretty-faced, like, gentleman in a three-piece suit who's just the one kind of diffuses situations, and he's a first-class mage, I think is the term that they used. But yeah, so I expect that the series will be them traveling around, fixing, solving problems, defeating witches, and things of that nature, whilst they look for the particular witch to break this curse, because the only way you can break a curse, which is introduced in the first chapter, is that, one, you get kissed by your true love's kiss from a prince on a white horse, and it has to be a reciprocated love kiss as well. So for 99.99% of people, you're shit out of luck if that's what you gotta rely on. The second one is basically try and find the witch that put this curse onto you and convince them, hey, could you please take this curse off of me, which is also, you're probably shit out of luck 99.99% of the time. But it is revealed that there's a secret third option, where you kiss the witch who cursed you, and thus the curse will be broken. And if you kiss a witch any witch, not the one who cursed you, the curse is temporarily broken. So you can regain yourself for a short period of time. But I do think that it's the witch who cast it herself, who, like, it breaks the curse. But yeah, it was pretty good. It's violent, and it's got a lot of action. As I said, maybe not one for those who are a bit squeamish, who dislike, like, dark fairy tales where it's like, oh yeah, Hansel and Gretel got captured by a witch and then got fucking eaten. Nobody saved them. Like, that kind of Grimm's fairy tales of, like, oh yeah, and shit went wrong, and the moral of the story is, shit's gonna go wrong, right? So there's amputation in this series. We don't see it happen, but it happens. There's a serial killer in the later chapters. Very violently, there's a lot of blood and viscera going on. So if you're squeamish, if you dislike those sorts of things, maybe give this one a skip. But I did like this quite a bit, and I'm looking forward to reading more about this world, more about these characters and the larger mystery, and following their quote-unquote adventures as they search for the witch who has cursed one of our main characters. A third debut for this month, this one from Yen Press, and this is another series that I talked about in my wrap-up video. Another one that I really, really, really loved, more so than I think I even expected, and I expected to like this one, so that gives you some indication. And this is volume 1 of Heterogenea Linguistico by Salt Seno. An introduction to interspecies linguistics. So this is the story of a I guess a university student or a linguistic student. I don't know if he's in university. I would presume so. Who called Hakuba, whose professor, his mentor, has been struck by failing health. I think he pulled us back out or whatever. And so he's been tasked with continuing his professor's research whilst he recovers, and so he goes to the netherworld to basically learn about and document the linguistics of supernatural creatures, non-human races, basically. So this is a fantasy setting, and so his first stop, his first protocol is a werewolf establishment, a werewolf village, where he is introduced to the local people, and most notably his guide, who is this small child here called Suzuki, who turns out to be his professor's child. I don't know if it's a boy or girl, but it's his child. And I was like, sir, I'm not gonna judge anyone's preferences, and I presume you have a wonderful relationship with your werewolf wife, but damn, right? Like, really, really interacting with the locals, as it were. Anyway, so he's got this half werewolf, half human guide, which actually helps in that this kid is able to explain in human terms stuff and languages and cultures that he are very foreign to him and to humans, right? So he knows a little bit of werewolf, and so he can communicate with them that way. But he's also wanting to, meet and find other people of the netherworld and document their language and I think, okay, so this is really my shit. First of all, it's a slice of life fantasy setting. It reminds me a lot of Delicious in Dungeon. It has a similar kind of idea of the mundane being placed into a fantasy setting, and it's done with a lot of care. So Delicious in Dungeon obviously is focused on food, but none of it's real, right? Not like half of the stuff that they eat are creatures that don't exist, but they apply like actual real life cooking techniques to these magical creatures and to these dishes that you're like, oh, that makes it like, oh, I could do that, or like, that makes sense. Yes, this is totally 100% doable, even though, like, of course, none of this exists. Like, it's not. This is a fantasy world where, like, mandrakes and orcs and hippogriffs and stuff don't exist in real life, right? But it's given this sheen of reality through the mundane tasks that do exist in our world. And obviously linguistics is like an actual thing. Like, it's an actual art, it's an actual cultural study science. And it's really interesting, like in real life linguistics, to see how a culture's words, how they speak to each other, and their vocabulary is formed by their surroundings and by their culture, right? Like, language is so important to people, and to history and to culture. It's why it is so important now that we try our best to preserve indigenous languages. It's why, it's so important that scholars are familiar with ancient languages, like languages that people don't even understand or like don't use anymore. When you look historically at documents and things like that, it's knowing how people communicate is reflected in how their lives are shaped, right? So using that idea that language is formative to culture and reflective of culture, you apply that to fictional, fantastical cultures, races, cultures. It's really interesting. Obviously, for werewolves, like as an example, they have a vocal language, but they also, majority of their communication is done through scent, and so that is something that is observed. And so for our human character Hakuba, he sees it as like werewolves are quite curt. They're a little bit standoffish. They don't talk to each other, or they kind of leave conversations midway because he doesn't have that scent communication that they do. And then later there's a lizard men or lizard people that he comes across, and a lot of their communication is done through, or a lot of their, they have a verbal language, right? But a lot of their written communication is done through colors rather than like words, or that we have alphabets and we string words together. They use colors and shades of colors because reptiles have a much broader spectrum of colors that they can see because of their eyes. And then also taking that, the way like the lizard people can't fully communicate in werewolvish to the same extent that werewolves can, because they don't have the physical similarities. They don't have lips, right? And they don't have the ability to make certain sounds. So it's really well done. It's really interesting. There's also slimes that are shown in this, kraken, harpies, which was really fun to see. So that was kind of bird communication, and so that used a lot of like rapid head movement. It's done really well, and it's not a Harta magazine series, but it reminds me a lot of series that I read in Harta magazine, which is my favorite magazine for manga, right? So Delicious in Dungeon came from there. Nicola traveling amongst the demon world, which again, this is very reminiscent of. A Bride Story, which is like a real cultural exploration, historical, but like is an actual thing that existed in real life, doesn't have the fantasy aspect of it. Hakume and Mikochi, and I love these sorts of slice of life series that have something of like interesting or have something fictional about them, but use real world things, real world studies, techniques or whatever, to make them interesting. I don't know. I just liked this one a lot, and I definitely recommend it if you do like that style of slice of life exploration of a culture where you're slowly introduced to various people, various places, and given the rundown of what life is like there, and who the people are there, and like why things are the way they are, and how things became that way. Like it's so good. It's so good, and it's quite funny and sweet, and yeah, I definitely, as I said, recommend it if you like Delicious in Dungeon, especially. And the art's pretty cute and lovely as well. And of course, like, you have to be a fan of fantasy as well, I think. It's not, if you're not that super keen on things that aren't that, or this sort of series that is, focusing so much on stuff that isn't real, with a dedication that like we do in reality, then this isn't gonna be for you. You're not gonna like it. But yeah, language is a fascinating thing to study. And in the series just does it really, really well, whilst being fun and, not that super serious. And yeah, I really loved this one a whole lot. We're not finished with the debuts yet, I'm telling you, but this one is a single volume completed book. It's also a sequel to another manga, and this is Viz's newest release of Revolutionary Girl Utena After the Revolution by Chiho Saito, apologies, and B Papa's, aka, Ikahara. So this is a sequel, I think it's at 10 years or 20 years after the events of the original series, and it follows various members of, all of the members of the student council and their lives now, having kind of like no memory of school and the events of Revolutionary Girl Utena. They've forgotten that, and so they don't really know. They've just gone on and lived with their lives, but something's happened recently, and they are reintroduced to the idea of the Rose Bride and this larger mystery of how this impacts their life, and it's very good. It's very good. It's nice to see some of these characters again, none of which, some are more likable and probably more as a reader you're wanting to see again, versus otherwise, but it's and also, like, it's been 20 years, none of these characters look any different. Right, they didn't grow up very much. And then also, but also, like, what Utena and Anthe have become or are doing, currently, and stuff like that. It's, how can you explain Utena? Really, like, there's always something going on. You always discover more about the series, whether you're watching it or reading it, as you go, and over multiple rereads. And this isn't a necessary sequel, but I think it was an anniversary thing that they did. And it's, as I said, interesting to reacquaint yourself with the student council and all of the stuff that happened at this school, and how the main story kind of continued from. You're not going to get any real answers necessarily, but it's nice to kind of revel in this world a little bit more. Still messy, still lots of drama, still lots of bad people making bad decisions, and somehow Utena impacting them and swaying them without even necessarily knowing it. And all recurring dreams of everyone dying and then waking up in the school and a girl sleeping in a coffin, and symbolism, so much symbolism. It's very classic Utena. If you like it, you like it. If you don't like it, you're not gonna like it. It's really exciting that we have gotten this, and it's nice to see that Utena have kind of this revival in this shape now, because it's a classic. It's definitely one that the anime, at least, and the manga are beloved by a lot of people for very good reason. And I, as an Ikahara fan, like, this is definitely his flagship series. I love all of his stuff, but this one is the one that a lot of people are very nostalgic for, a lot of people grew up with, a lot of people connected with, and sort of the queer storytelling of it, and how these characters deal with trauma or create trauma. It's and it still holds up. Like, if you're watching it now or reading it now for the first time, it's still something that says everything that it needs to say, and more. Plus, well, it doesn't say everything that it's wanting to say in such oblique words. It's one that you read between the lines and you explore, and you kind of demystify through symbolism. It's with all of Ikahara stuff, there's as much or as little of it that you can figure out through what it presents you as you want to. So if you want to go into all of the minutia of the symbolism, then you're absolutely perfectly welcome to do that. But then there's also people who might just disregard that and watch or read it, and just for the very oblique story that they're telling, without all of the kind of smaller, more, well, not smaller messages, but less obvious messaging. Well, it's still obvious. It's hard. All of it's obvious, maybe, is what I should say, but it's not explained outright. It's not said by the characters yes, this is the theme of this thing, and this is why we're showing this image over and over and over again. It's just kind of expected that watchers, once interested, go and do their own mental connections with it. But yeah, Usuna's great. Really happy to have this one. And I think that's all of the Usuna that there is, and certainly all of the Usuna that we've gotten. Support Ikahara and his stuff. Another debut title. This is actually the only one of the debuts that I haven't read yet, because I think I'm just going to wait for the second volume to come out and then read them together. And this unfortunately didn't come in time for the most recent podcast episode, but this is Natsume Ono's Waka 13 Territory Inspection Department PS, which is a spin-off to the original series, and I had assumed that this is a sequel. I don't think it's actually a sequel. I think it so here it says it's about the elite, the chief officers, who were kind of heading the Aka, heading Aka, and so this is about them establishing their group and how they got into those positions and why they may have chosen to be a part of this this board. It's basically like a board of directors, right? And I think if you're wanting more about these characters, you're left, with questions, or you're left, wanting a little more closure, as it were, with these particular men, then this, I think, will provide more of that context. Aka is, I like it. And if you've listened to the podcast, you know that I do like it. I was introduced to it via the anime, but I'm a fan of Natsume Ono's anyway. And it follows an Aka officer called Jean, who is auditing. He's traveling around the various 13 districts of this country, or the Kingdom of Doha, which have 13 very distinct states, and auditing their local Aka branches, basically. And but whilst that's happening, there's also rumors of a coup going on, and he's kind of getting caught up in that, but not really, because he's not super motivated to get involved, because he doesn't necessarily really like his job, and he doesn't really necessarily care about all the political scheming of the country. He just wants to live his life, smoke cigarettes, and just, exist without without having to exert too much. Amongst that, as I said, there's this larger kind of board of directors within Aka, these chief officers, these 5 men who all come from various different territories within the country, and they make decisions. They have a monarchy in this. Obviously, it's a kingdom of Doa. They have a royal family, but they're not really the. I mean, I guess you'd see them as like a typical modern day where countries have royal families, but they're not the be all end all of government. More so figureheads of a country and leadership, whereas the actual government is this Aka group. Anyway, so I just flipped through this a little bit, and we see kind of all of these characters in their younger days, and I mean, I haven't read this one yet, so I can't tell you, but I would expect that it's more so about their lives before joining these chief officers, or reflecting on the time of like how they joined, how they got to this point, and why they did, their motivations behind that. So yeah, I mean, if you liked the original series, then it's kind of a no-brainer to pick up. Otherwise, if you like Natsume Ono's work, I do think that Aka's one of the stronger of her series, and it's worth the read. And if you like it, pick this one up. It is, as I said, like a sequel or spin-off, kind of related to the main series. And her current series, she's done a lot of stuff that's related to Aka or set in the Kingdom of Doa setting recently, so we may see more of those titles coming to print. I wouldn't be surprised if we do see Badon from Yen Press in the next couple years. But yeah, Aka 13 PS, which obviously, like, PS means postscript, so which is why I made the assumption that it's a sequel, or like after the fact of the main series. But reading, I mean, I don't know, but reading the back, it gives more of an intention of it being, maybe it might be set afterwards, but it's more a reflection of prior to the series starting. Anyway, I don't actually have the answers. We will find out, I'm sure, because I am hoping to, well, as I said, I don't know if I'm going to read this one right now, like in the next week or so, or if I'm going to just wait and get the second one and read both of them together, and then I will have a more informed opinion after that. Is another debut, another single volume completed series. This one from Yen Press, one that I was highly anticipating, didn't disappoint. Lovely release, and that is My Broken Mariko by Waka Hirako. Another book with very mature, heavy themes, so fair warning for those who may be sensitive to certain topics. This is the story of a young woman who, after the untimely death, the suicide of her best friend, decides to take her friend's ashes and take her to the ocean, and together, so something they were never able to do while she was still alive. And this is, whilst she's going on this trip, she's struggling with her own grief, and especially now, having survived or having outlived her best friend, who she really was her only support system and closest confidant, and how she struggles with the feeling of failure and having let her best friend down. It's a heavy book. So her best friend, Mariko, who has since passed, they became friends in junior high or middle school, whichever you want to call it. And Mariko, her whole life, was very violently abused, both physically and sexually, by her father, and our main character was really the only person who knew about that and kind of did anything about that. And then as they got older, as I said, Mariko really relied on her, saw her as her only support system, and saw her as, you know, the hope in a hopeless situation. Since like middle school and high school and graduation, Mariko, over the course of her life, like a lot of abused people, made very bad relationship decisions, would keep getting into relationships with people who would physically, like, violently assault her. And again, our main character was sort of the person to drag her out of those and, like, question her as to, like, why she would keep going back to people who so obviously don't care about her. And the conundrum of abused people being stuck in the cycle of abuse, of being stuck looking for what is familiar to them, which unfortunately is violence against them, and sexual violence against them. It's heartbreaking, but it is also very true to life. It is something that happens, and I think it's done very, very well with our own characters' feelings of why wasn't I good enough to help her, but also recognizing, like, well, I was also the one who, you know, the struggle of, like, because it's not her fault, it's neither of them's fault, but as the friend, as someone who did see herself as Mariko's savior, the struggle of, it's my fault now that she's dead, it's my fault that I wasn't able to save her. And that's a very powerful thing to go through, and a very difficult thing to go through and come to terms with, and realize that no, like, it's not your fault that her father was abusive and that you weren't able to help her with everything that had happened to her, and it's not your fault that ultimately she decided to take her life, because she couldn't see a future doing, you know, living where she wasn't in these situations. And it's not your fault when somebody kills themselves. Like, that's all, like, when suicide happens, that's always like, what didn't I see? What were those warning signs? How could I have helped this person? And you have to recognize that suicide is a personal thing, and no matter what, like, you can't apply the, like, oh, what if I'd done something different? How could I have changed this? Because it's a personal decision by that person who may have made the decision in a moment of weakness, very often has, but it's nobody's fault. I mean, some people would argue that the only person at fault is the one who makes that decision, and perhaps it's not a fault to make that decision, but it's ultimately, as an outside party, quote unquote, as somebody who isn't that person, it's not your decision to make, and it's not your inherent responsibility to save everyone and to make sure that everyone is doing okay 100% of the time. Obviously, very, very, very heavy topic, very difficult topic, and so, yeah, it's not an easy read, it's not a lighthearted read, it's not something that is super easy to recommend either, but it is very, very good. Very, very good. There's also a one-shot in here called Ishizuka, which is interesting as well. It's set in, like, the I want to say, like, 80s, 90s, 80s probably, about a single chapter. It's about I guess a hired gunman called Tyler, who's trying to get to the border, the Mexican border, and has hired a young Native American boy to basically just like take him across the border through the deserts, because he's trying to get away from the people who hired him, because he's kind of self-reflected and made the decision that he doesn't want to be a hired gunman anymore. He doesn't want to be an assassin or a killer, and seeing hope now in his guide and this kid who has had a pretty tough life and hasn't had a lot of hope either, and obviously there's a lot that the manga, like, it just the single chapter says about like how the Native Americans are treated by society, which is, I mean, hey, Thanksgiving was recently, and there's still so many issues in those communities that are imposed upon them by the government and non-Native Americans. It's sad. It's very sad. Indigenous people, there's so many issues in their community that have been caused by outside communities, and part of that is reflected in the single chapter. Anyway, doesn't matter. That's just an additional chapter to this, and I thought that it was a pretty thematically, like, it's different thematically, but it's pretty paired well with this particular book. And I hope that we see more of Hirako's work, because this was very, very, very good. I should probably show you the inside. Really, I really like the art style as well. Kind of the messy lines, maybe is the right word. But yeah, definitely worth the read if you don't mind very emotionally heavy topics and themes. And yeah, beautiful release from Yeon Press. Okay, let's start on some of the continuing manga titles that I have in my pickups this month. I'm going to start with the other hardcover Yeon Press release that I got. One of my favorite series of all time. So happy I finally got this volume. This is volume 12 of A Bride Story by Kaoru Mori. I mean, yeah, what do I say about this? This is a slice of life travelogue, a cultural experience of Central Asia, the Middle East, the Silk Road, kind of whole way through there, and it follows, well, we follow multiple characters, multiple brides, as it were, and our not self-insert, but our character that kind of is the outsider to this culture, who is the one who's learning about all of these people and their places and the cultures and how it's expressed through, what garments, food, language, etc., is an Englishman called Henry Smith, who has been traveling around this area, has been staying with various people and meeting various people, so he's the crux of like why a lot of these explanations happen, but generally our main characters are the women themselves and the various goings on in their lives. Our main character is Amir, who is a 20-year-old woman, recently married to her husband Karluk, who is 12, and they are quite the odd couple. He's a little too young to be married. She's very old to be getting married, especially her first marriage. And but despite that, they are quite a well-paired couple. Again, I say with all of these series, when it comes, or whenever I talk about the series, we know my stance on age gaps and relationships between minors and adults and things like that, especially in manga, but across all media. The difference with this series is the historical context. Generally, people of both gender, or, boys and girls, were married off at 13, 14 years old, And as I said, for Amir, who is 20, like, she's old. And so the fact that there is an 8-year age gap is something that's, like, noted and seen as odd and curious and, unexpected and perhaps inappropriate in the this culture and this countries, but it's not because the younger of the two is not an adult and isn't preparing for marriage anyway. It's more so it's like, oh, she's 20, like, she's kind of missed the boat. How many kids can a 20-year-old have? Like, that's not right. It's not like, oh, this is a child and we need to protect him. He's seen as an adult. He's able to get married and be married. And so you have to remember that the series is done in that context versus, like, oh, modern day Japan, where a high schooler is married or hanging out with dating like an adult, a teacher, a fireman, a policeman. Like, this, no, let's not do that one. So perhaps a little bit hypocritical, but I do think it's historically accurate. Like, it, and also one of the other female characters, and it wasn't unheard of either. Like, we know that in certain cultures, and especially historically, there are people who are older and adult, as we see in, like, modern society, who married very young people who at the time were regarded as adults, 12, 13, 14-year-olds. One of our, as I said, one of our other brides, she had a very unfortunate spate of all of her husbands died, right? And she kept marrying the brothers of her husband. So she had one husband. He died. So she married his next, oldest brother. He died. She married his next older brother. He died. And then she married the next oldest brother, and he died too. And the youngest one was like 10, and she's in, her at least 20. Like, so it's not unheard of that was a thing, but it typically you would have a bridal couple who were similar, if not the same age, and the majority of the couples in the series are that. We have as I said, we have both adult and teenage couples, some of whom are married, most of whom are married, some of who are preparing for marriage. And I love this series so much. So we have our Mr. Smith as kind of retracing his step. He met his associate that he needed to touch base with them, and now he's kind of backtracking and giving his regards to all of the people that he's met along the way thus far. So he goes back to meet the husband of these two. So these two, again, kind of a reflective of the culture of polyamory or polygamous marriages. They both have the same husband, and that was done as a way to ensure that this woman and her young son were supported after the untimely death of her first husband. It's done really, really well. It's beautiful. Kaoru Mori is a phenomenal artist. And we also have Mr. Smith's love interest, another one of the brides of this story, who is, in fact, she's the one who 4 of her husbands died or whatever, who was married to the 10-year-old for a short period. She and he are romantically involved, and so she's also meeting these people, and because a lot of these cultures are similar, but they're not quite the same. There's different levels of Islamic modesty, because and different foods and different ways that certain establishments, certain cultures, certain tribes or whatever interact, and it's done really, really well. And I think it'll be nice to revisit some of these characters. I'm gonna show you some of the. Oh yeah, I mean, and we don't just focus on our main characters. Obviously, we do get quite equal time with like all of the characters that are introduced. Okay, damn, this chapter, if you like hair, if you find hair sexy, and I mean head hair, maybe not other places hair, then that's the chapter for you. I'm also not going to open up the ending too much, last chapters, because it is the women's baths, and there's, I don't know how much nudity I can show off, when doing these videos. But yeah, A Bride Story. Phenomenal series. One of my absolute favorites. I'm going to be really sad once it's over. But it is, to date, Karamori's longest work. And I am always excited whenever we get a new volume. I do hope one day that Yen Press will hear my prayer and relicense Shirley, or Shirley Madison as it's known now. Because I want it, and that's the only one of her series that we haven't gotten, or at least gotten in its entirety in English as of right now. So please, Yen Press, please. Okay, now we have another Viz title. This is the most recent volume of Dead Dead Demons Dead Destruction by Inio Asano. This is personally my favorite of Asano's work. I know that may be a little bit controversial of a statement, but I find it a perfect balance of like Asano's nihilism with kind of with less of the depressed dourness of his other stuff, right? I have a love-hate relationship with Asano. I've read a majority of his works. I got halfway through Pun Pun and just couldn't do it. That one's just really, I dislike the idea that there's never any hope to situations, and that life is always going to be bad, and therefore, like, no matter what you do, bad things will always happen to you, and there's no point in being a good person, etc. That a lot of, like, that Pun Pun kind of encourages. And it's very reflective of a depressive mental state, right? That I would assume that Asano has and struggles with, and because it's reflective in every single thing that he's ever done. But I do think that there are series that he's done previously with a lot more hope, that with a lot more like, yes, things are bad, but things can change for the better. And just because bad things happen to you doesn't mean that it's the end of the world, and you can always persevere as long as you're alive and you keep going. Things like Solanin and and this one, so it's certainly an Asano title. It has the nihilism of it, but it has a millennial-esque / Zoomer style of nihilism of, the world is crap, and there's crazy things going on, and it's out of our hands, and there's nothing we can really do about it. The end of the world is coming, so let's meme about it, and eat pizza for every meal, and just, do whatever we want, because the rules don't apply, and why should we stick to, like, societal expectations when there's literally aliens hovering above us right now, and they could blow us up at any moment? Like, why should we care about school grades and, like, seeming like, perfect people and having our lives together, because the whole world doesn't have its life together, right? And I think that's something that especially the younger generations can connect with. The election just ended, but the amount of political turmoil that was happening up until just very recently has been an ongoing thing for much longer than the recent presidency. I think we can all agree. We are in a climate crisis. We're in a financial crisis. We're in the middle of a global pandemic where hundreds of thousands, millions, hundreds of millions of people are dying, right? And so there is that level of like, we're all just trying to survive this. So who cares if we're doing childish things? I'm gonna watch cartoons and eat ice cream. And yeah, I'm 35, but who fucking cares? Like, we could all be dead tomorrow. It doesn't matter. And that attitude in this series is very much more, I think, the voice of the generation that I currently occupy and that young people are growing into. Yeah. Dead Demons Destruction is great. It's definitely my favorite of Asano's work. If you didn't quite get what the series is about, this is a Tokyo in where at the beginning they're high school girls, but a group of friends live in Tokyo, live their day-to-day lives, but 3 years prior, aliens invaded, and there's a huge alien mothership hovering above the city of Tokyo, and every so often they'll send out little alien scouts to, hang out, but pretty immediately they're almost always taken down by the self-defense, Japanese self-defense, and nothing really happens. There was a crisis when the aliens first showed up, but it's been 3 years and kind of people have gotten used to it. Things only stay bizarre for a set amount of period, and humans have a wonderful ability to adapt to pretty much any situation, regardless of how absurd. And so it's about these girls and their lives in Tokyo now that their aliens have been proven to exist. And just kind of living with that and realizing, like, no matter how absurd something happens, no matter how absurd that happens, you will always at some point grow bored with it because you become used to it. And the struggling with that idea of, like, nothing will truly be exciting your whole life. So, trying to find the motivation of, like, how do you keep life exciting? How do you make sure that you aren't just, like, bored and depressed all the time? And yeah, it's really, 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 really good. Really good. I mean, it goes without saying, but Asano has a pretty great art style. His characters always have kind of this childish look to them, regardless of age, so maybe that's an issue with some people, but I think it also kind of reflects that, these are young, like, they're young people, they're in their teens, but they're not adults yet. Yeah. Really happy to have this. It took a while for this volume to come out because we are caught up with the Japanese releases. And I don't know how much longer this story will run, but I am always happy when we get a new volume. I haven't actually read this one yet, or I think volume 7 either. I think I've been waiting to build up a little bit of a backlog to just read it all at once. But yeah, personally, my favorite of Asano's works. I've owned quite a few of his titles over the years, and I've kept Ikahara Holograph and Solanin, and that's about it. I don't really have the urge to keep anything else or rebuy any of his other titles. Just because, yeah, they can be tough to read purposefully. And I dislike the depressed mindset that his books very much encourage, which are, like, it's not a bad thing or it's not a wrong thing for him to do, but I do dislike the amount of people who kind of cling to the depressed parts of his stories and hold it up as genius, and because it reflects their own personal like experiences in life, which is again totally valid, like not a bad thing, but they use that as an excuse to just therefore then say like, and life is hopeless, and you know there's no reason to change anything or fix anything, there's no hope for the future, and you shouldn't be optimistic about anything, which kind of seems to be the trend that I see when people are talking about his other titles, right? Maybe I'm off the mark. Maybe I'm projecting, but that tends to be the attitude that I see generally. But yeah, Dead Dead Demons, Dead Dead Destruction, great series, definitely check it out. Especially if you're not that much of an Asano fan for his other works. This one is quite a bit different and notably more enjoyable. Next we have a penultimate volume, so second to last volume, with O Maidens in Your Savage Season by Mari Okada and now Emoto doing the art. This is I haven't read this one yet because I'm hoping to get the 8th volume soon, in a couple weeks soon, because it has been released. And this is a story of a high school literature club full of girls who are just coming into their sexuality, and so having a lot of personal feelings and exploration and struggles with sex and with attraction, and how each of them deals with that and their personal experiences, and how I've said this before with this series. Like with Asano, I have a love-hate relationship with Mari Okada. I do respect her a lot, and I give her 100% credit for everything that she's achieved. And I have different issues with her compared to like Asano and other creators. More so, I find a lot of her stuff, a lot of her emotional stuff, a little bit too on the melodramatic side, a little bit too overwrought. As much as I like Anohana, it at times felt a touch like just too much. As much as I loved Makuya, it there's a feeling of like I'm being emotionally manipulated and it's working, but it's frustrating that I recognize that this isn't always a genuine reaction. It's more so I can feel you wanting to make me cry, right? And I've said this before with like key anime, right? So anyway, you stop saying right. It's annoying me that I'm saying it so much. But so, O Maidens in Your Savage Season, it has levels of melodrama, but because it's middle school or high school girls, they're melodramatic anyway, so I absolutely 100% find it much more convincing. As someone who was once a high school girl, I can absolutely testify that yes, high school girls can just be all over the shop when it comes to certain things, especially when it comes to attraction and sexuality and relationships and things like that. And I do really appreciate and really respect that Okada has created a series that focuses on female sexuality, especially teenage female sexuality, because it's definitely seen, I think, in wider culture as a taboo subject. It's very obvious and very well accepted that teenage boys are horny and like, oh ha ha ha, yeah, teenage boys masturbate so many times and this, that, and it's such a normal thing that it's kind of become a comedic thing that TV shows and books and whatever else make fun of, and even like conversations amongst friends and amongst family acknowledges male sexuality and teenage boys' interest in sex. But for girls, generally, and again, these are sweeping umbrella statements, but generally, and it has been changing more so in the last 10 years, but generally, if a girl expresses her attraction, her need for a physical intimacy, then she's seen as like uncouth, you know, a slut, a whore. Like there's a very negative connotation to female sexuality, especially when you're a younger person, especially when you're a teenage girl. It's expected that, you know, you don't have sex, or you only have sex with your boyfriend after a certain period, or girlfriend, whoever, after a certain period of time. And you know, if you have multiple partners, then you know you're dirty and unclean, and you know you're a bad influence on all of these people. And if you get pregnant, at a young age, then, well, it's your own fault, because of course, what did you expect would happen when you're sleeping around, regardless of the fact that, like, hey, it takes two to tango. And also, boys, there's not very rarely that same kind of stigma of like, oh, he has like 5 girlfriends and he sleeps with all of them, what a slut. Like, that's not that, we know that that's not the case, right? That this is sexism and the patriarchy in action. And I don't think, again, I don't think that should be a controversial thing to say, but I'm gonna say it. And so by recognizing that in this series, and by having a series that does focus on female sexuality during this period, it's just really, really refreshing to see. It definitely opens up the conversation and of girls and how they mature into themselves. But also, I really respect that Okada has made all of these characters' experiences different, because obviously people are different. Not every girl is going to mature at the same rate. Not every girl has an interest in sex, kind of full stop, and some may never. Like, it's just where some may be like really interested and really keen for it at a younger age. Like it so the fact that we have these different characters doing different things and experiencing different things and coming to terms with their feelings at their own pace is just really well done. Yeah, I love this series a whole bunch. And although I haven't read this volume as of right now, I am hoping to in the next couple weeks, whilst I get once I get that last volume. But yeah, also now Emoto's art is just beautiful. She did the art for another series, Forget Me Not, I think is what it's called. I can't remember. But yeah, definitely give it a shot if it sounds like something you may be interested in. This is another one that, like, when we talk about Mari Okada, this is definitely one to go into her success column. This is one that I'm like, yep, this is great. This is a good one, and I love it. And there's none of the emotional manipulation that a lot of more of her tear-jerking titles evoke. So yeah, definitely check this one out. Okay, next we have, I bought both of these locally. No, one I had to buy online because I bought... Okay, so I'm stupid, maybe. So I mentioned that I've been going to a local comic store recently. And they have a lot of titles there that, one, are normally, like, released way earlier than they would be in Australia otherwise. And two, some that just don't get a store release. A brick and mortar store release in Australia generally, or at least not that I've ever noticed when I have gone in to kind of peruse the manga section of a typical bookstore. But so last month I picked up a volume of this series, and was like, yay, it was the most recent volume, or kind of the most recent volume, but I didn't realize that I didn't have the volume before it, so I couldn't read it immediately. But thankfully, due to the power of the internet, I was able to get that volume that I was missing. And I also, the comic store, I went back to that comic store last weekend, and they had the newest volume. So I was like, I'm gonna buy it. So this is Snow White with the Red Hair, volume 8 and volume 10. Yeah. Okay, so I love this series. This is a currently ongoing series from Sorata Akidoki. I was introduced to the series via the anime. Highly recommend it. I think Funimation's released it in its entirety, 2 seasons. Done by Bones as well. Looks beautiful. So this is the story of a teenage girl, late teenage girl here, Shiryuki, who she is kind of a herbalist in training. Her grandparents were raising her to, help people and make medicines. But the prince of her kingdom, has heard the rumors about her because she has bright red hair, which is very unusual, very attractive, and he wants to basically take her into the palace for himself and become, I don't know, part of a harem or something. Some sort of, he wants her for himself. And this prince is very stubborn and not really regarded very highly. The people hate him, basically. Prince Raj, not people don't like him. And Shiryuki doesn't want to do that. She doesn't want to be a kept woman. So, in the middle of the night, she decides to run away. She goes through the forest, and then she runs into this group of people, who she helps because some stuff happened, and she helps them with her medicinal abilities. And she gets invited to the castle, the neighboring kingdom of Clarines, in order to join and train as a herbalist there, as a court herbalist, because this group that she ran into is the second prince of Clarines, Zen, who is this character here, and his entourage, basically his personal guards, Mitsuhide and Kiki, and Shiryuki and Zen kind of hit it off pretty immediately. There's very obvious romantic attraction there, and they don't beat around the bush with it either. They pretty quickly, acknowledge their reciprocated feelings, and so it's their love story, it's their relationship, but also it's a royalty or a kingdom story. There's no huge political plot or it's not like a Yona where there's a quest or a thing that Shiryuki and Zen have to do necessarily, compared to Yona and Hawk and the dragons. They're not trying to overthrow a kingdom here, but they still have smaller political and cultural issues, governmental issues, and problems that they have to deal. Sometimes, again, for Zen as a representative of his kingdom, sometimes needing Shiryuki's knowledge of being a herbalist, and there's been like kidnapping attempts and smugglers and strange illnesses in neighboring kingdom, all these sorts of things. So there's problems that they solve, but they solve them as a team. They solve them together, and that's why I really like this series. Both parties in this relationship are very, very supportive of each other, recognize each other's skills. Zen never has the assumption that Shiryuki should stop being a herbalist, that it would be better if she just became, a princess, and they got married and she never did anything for the rest of her life. and then Shiryuki acknowledge, like, she knows and she recognizes the fact that Zen, as a prince, he does have certain expectations. There are things that affect him that normal people would never have to experience. And then, of course, we have Kiki and Mitsuhide, who are the guards that I mentioned earlier. And then we have Obi as well, who's this character who is introduced and later becomes Shiryuki's kind of personal bodyguard. And, okay, I'm gonna say this in a small voice, because it's not really the point of the series, but if you like OT3s, if you like thruples, then Shiryuki and Zen and Obi, pretty great, and also pretty, like, readily acknowledged a lot of the time in this series. I'm just putting it out there. You don't have to agree, boys. You'd be blind if you said that there was nothing there. Let's just put it that way. Anyway, I really like the series. I kind of wax poetic about it a lot. This particular volume is quite sweet. We have Shiryuki and Zen going on their first ever date, which is lovely. We also have some background on Kiki and Mitsuhide and their relationship, and it's also, like, romantic as heck. Like, dang it, if you just want something with a really lovely couple that you want to see succeed, being cute to each other, and be having some gosh darn romantic moments, and also some really funny comedy. Snow White with the red hair. You cannot go wrong with Snow White with the red hair. And with this volume, we're almost halfway through. There's 23 volumes out in Japanese currently. And considering that this was only licensed relatively recently, maybe end of 2018, we've caught up pretty, like, we're catching up. We're getting there. And I'm gonna be sad when we're caught up. But also, that means we'll be at, like, 23 volumes. So not too sad. And this is another series that I kind of feel like, regardless of however long it goes, I still will want to read it. I will still love these characters and just kind of revel in their lives, because a lot of times when I feel like shoujo gets too long, and it's the same like with shonen gets too long, but shoujo in particular, a lot of the times when I feel like it's outlived its life in shoujo is series that focus on the getting together aspect of a relationship. And this is usually high school romance stuff. There's usually a lot of misunderstandings and rival characters and this, that, whatever else. And which would all be solved if the characters actually talk to each other. And I know teenagers don't like to do that, but it's infuriating when a series is like 20-something volumes when it really could have been like 7, right? Even the shorter ones, like we recently that we've gotten series that are like 12, 14 volumes, that if characters, you could even have like some of the tropes, those stories could be done in like 5 volumes. They don't need to be that long. And it is anyway. A lot of times my issues are that, like, just communicate, just get together already. It's that frustration of like watching these two people pussyfoot around each other and never want to like actually just get to the point. And as much as you might love the characters and as much as like how sweet you find them, it's an aggravator for me. Whereas with this series, like out the gate, it's pretty much like first or second volume, Zen and Shiryuki get together. And we know from the beginning that they like each other, and it's really only the confirmation of the relationship that happens early on that is done. And then from there, you see them in the relationship. Which is what some of the best romance manga and anime can do. I mean, there's perhaps a reason why so many people love My Love Story, in that that's a high school romance series, but the couple gets together immediately, and from there we follow them together as a couple, going through things together and overcoming things together. And sure, there might be misunderstandings and mistakes and whatever else, but because these people already are clear that they're dating and that there's obviously an attraction there or an interest, then they can communicate and get through the problems that they find, and thus, actually work as a couple, comparatively to a series that waits for its characters to get together, waits, and then in the 11th hour, at the end of the series, like, that's the climax, is they get together, they kiss and, live happily ever after and go off into the sunset. And maybe have a couple more volumes to tie up all the other side characters and their romantic interests. That's less interesting to me than watching people or having a couple who are already together and you want them to succeed because you like these characters and they're good for each other, or maybe they're trying to be better for each other. And Snow White with the Red Hair is definitely in that camp where it's like, these are good people and a cute couple, and they're overcoming things as a couple, and that's what partners, and like, that's what your partner should be, is as a partner. Like, you support each other and you help each other and you understand each other's strengths and weaknesses, and you hopefully make up for those. Snow White with the Red Hair, definitely read it if it sounds like something that you're interested in. It's also not a fantasy setting. It's like a fairy tale kind of kingdom setting, but not a fantasy one. So that might make the difference for some people as well. Next is another volume that I talked about I talked about Snow White with the Red Hair in my weekly wrap-up, but I also talked about this series in my weekly wrap-up because I had just read this and the prior volume this last week, and that is Toilet Bound Hanako-kun by Aida Iro. This is an ongoing supernatural, mystery drama comedy series about a high school girl called Nene who, after hearing about the 7 mysteries of her school, she decides to summon Hanako-san, which is a pretty common rumor, folktale in Japan, which tends to be about the ghost of a girl who is in a particular bathroom stall, in one of the girls' bathrooms, and if you say her name 3 times or whatever, she'll appear and grant your wish. So she does that, and she's hoping to have her wish granted in that one of her senpai, one of the boys in one of the years above her, will fall in love with her because she's like madly in love with this guy. But to her surprise, Hanako-san, this ghost, is actually Hanako-kun, because it is a young teenage boy ghost, who is the 7th of the 7 mysteries around this particular school. And he agrees to help her, but in a more practical way. He gets out a book on how to succeed at love and stuff. So they try that for a while, not super successful, and Nene discovers that Hanako this whole time has had mermaid scales, which can be used as a matchmaking potion power thing. And so she gets quite upset with him and steals them and takes them herself. But little does she know that it means that she is now contracted to a mermaid, and in order to kind of save herself from being a goldfish for the rest of her life, Hanako saves her. He eats the other goldfish scale, and saves her, generally, from being snatched by a mermaid, but asks her to become his human assistant in helping him kind of run the school and make sure that all of the supernatural entities that hang around, all the other mysteries at the school, are behaving themselves, because he's in charge of them. And recently, a lot of them have been going kind of hectic, going kind of haywire, and a lot of the mysteries are becoming more malicious than they used to be. Previously, a lot of these mysteries were a lot more benign. And so she doesn't really have a choice. She agrees. And later we are introduced to this character here, who's middle school student, a year younger than Nene. And he's part of an exorcist family. And so initially his goal is to exorcise Hanako, but kind of gets caught up and becomes friends with the two after some other stuff. So I love this series. I was reading when Yen Press, and I said this yesterday or the day before, when Yen Press licensed this, I think people were perhaps put off by the toilet bound aspect of the title. Don't judge it by that. It's not a fetishy thing. It's not gross or crass. It is literally because the rumor, the folklore, the whatever is that the Hanako-san, the ghost, is like Moaning Myrtle. She is in a particular bathroom stall, toilet stall in the girls' bathroom, and you have to go there to, like, that's where she died or whatever, and she's bound to that area. For Hanako-kun, he didn't die in the girls' bathroom. Just putting that out there. But because he occupies the Hanako title, that's where he hangs out typically. But he does travel around the school, and it's the three of them going around fixing or helping the other mysteries and fixing things, because, as I said, things are going haywire, and there's a larger problem. There may be someone behind the scenes, someone related to Hanako, both very literally and figuratively, who are responsible for all of these changing things in the school recently. It's very, very good. I like it so much. It's fun, it's funny, but also has a good good dollop of action and mystery. And I love the art style, right? I love it so much. If you haven't checked out the anime, I highly recommend it. It's super good. And was just recently is getting a second season, announced for a second season, so that's exciting and fun. I read the first 3 of these volumes digitally, because Yen Press has been releasing this digital first, and then it did later get announced for a print release. So there's 13 volumes of this out in digital. Considering there's 14 volumes out in Japan, like, we're pretty much caught up. This 5th volume is the most recent in print, and I would expect that we should catch up over the next year, dependent on, printing schedules with the current state of the world. It's great. I love it. This is a G Fantasy series, so if you like G Fantasy series, like Pandora Hearts or Black Butler, there's more than that we do get, but if you like that kind of, there's creepy mystery, like supernatural element style to it, but also like the fun comedy slapstick almost of those titles, and you don't mind the going between the two, definitely check this one out. And as I said, even if you don't, I would recommend the anime if you don't want to necessarily invest in the series right off the bat, the print manga, or buy some of the volumes digitally, because they are good, and you know that's you're able to try it at least that way, or get it from your library. You know, all of these options that are available to you. To Abound Hanako-kun, don't be put off by the name. The art, I don't know, maybe people dislike the art, but I really love the art. It's very cute. And it's great. I think all of the characters are pretty interesting. We know that I'm a sucker for supernatural series. We know I'm a sucker for mystery series as well. So, like, this is definitely up my alley. And if you're like me, then I think you'd enjoy it a lot too. So yeah, check this one out. Continuing with great titles. Well, I mean, I love everything that I always get, but this one, I feel like I just read the the volume before this, and thankfully, this volume came super duper quickly. And literally the moment that I got it, I opened my mail and got it. I sat down and read it and was like, oh, now I have to wait for the next one. So this is Yeon of the Dawn, Volume 26 by Mizuho Kusanagi. This ties up or finishes the Shing arc, which was done very well, really enjoyable. Really great to see some particular characters again. I think the way this concluded had a lot of weight to it, and just showed off how much conflict that there was, but also how much Yona herself as a character has changed. I continue to love the series, right? This is one of my favorite ongoing series, and there's very few people I've come across who dislike the series, or not dislike, but found that it wasn't for them. So I feel like I repeat myself whenever there's a new volume for this, but I also don't want to presume that everyone watching knows what this series is about. It's a shoujo series about a young princess called Yona who gets ousted from her home, the castle, by her cousin, whom she previously had romantic interests in. He killed the king and tried to have her killed, or ordered, I guess, her to be killed. But she escaped with her personal bodyguard, Hawk, who's also who was the head of the guards and very well-established young guy. And all three, her cousin and herself and Hawk, were all childhood friends. They'd known each other for a very long time. So now Yona is struggling with the betrayal from someone who she deeply cares about, and, as I said, had romantic interest in. Now coming to terms with the fact that he murdered her father, who is regarded as a really peaceful king who had brought nothing but good things to the kingdom. But when she escapes, she kind of comes to know the kingdom as it actually was, and perhaps her father wasn't the greatest emperor, king, whatever it was that she thought that he was. But anyway, so she and Hawk come across a fortune teller who tells her that she is destined to become the Crimson King, or she's the reincarnation of the Crimson King, who was a figure in their history previously, who is the one who united all of the lands of this area to establish this kingdom, with the help of 4 dragon warriors who were bequeathed supernatural strengths from four dragons, and who helped win this war and unite the people and create this country of peace. So initially she has to go around and find these 4 dragons. In the 26th volume since then, she definitely has. So we have Gija, Jaiha, Shinha, and Zeno, who have a dragon power. So Gija has like a claw hand. Jaiha has a dragon leg. He's able to leap to great heights and at great speed. Shinha has dragon eyes. He's able to freeze people's bodies. And then Zeno has the body of a dragon, which I'm not gonna spoil, but is a little less of an obvious power compared to the other 3. And a heartbreaking one, so we're not gonna get into it. This is a fantastic series that just continues to get better and better and better. All of the characters are so interesting, so likable. The dragons are really fun, but also there's a lot of nuance to them and all of their different personal experiences and how things have changed for them, and all because the dragon warriors, despite their historical relevance or whatever, their power now multiple generations after the fact, haven't, for certain groups, haven't been treated very well. So many of them come from a very abusive background, and so Yona and her band of friends, aka the Happy Hungry Bunch, which obviously is the 4 dragons, Hawk, and an additional guy who's just with them called Yeon, who's the mother hen of the group. He kind of makes sure that they all don't die. He makes all the food for them and like looks after camp. And he also is a experienced, I guess, herbalist, medic, as it were. And of course, Yuna are traveling around this wide country and helping people and fixing problems and becoming more acquainted with the various issues in this kingdom, and with the expectation that hopefully one day Yona will retake the throne, and get rid of Suwon, or I don't know, overthrow Suwon, or do something to Suwon to get him out of the king's spot. But of course, there is obviously a very emotional conflict with both Yona and with Hawk, and the betrayal from someone who they very much trusted. And it's great. It's really, really good. Like I said with Snow White with the red hair, but probably even more so for a lot of people, this is a series that could span for so long, so much, and still be just a joy to read. Just be so great and never feel like it's worn out its welcome. I love the series. I highly recommend the series. If you haven't tried it, please do. Please give it a shot. And yeah, I this particular volume wraps up the current arc, and big stuff at the end there, and I am super excited to see where the next volume goes and how it addresses the particular events of volume 26, because the romantic relationship, which is rarely the forefront of the series, this isn't like there's romance in it, but it's not like, that's not the point of the series compared to, you know, some of the other shoujo that we're seeing currently. But there's a big jump in this particular series with this volume, and I love it. Yeah, I mean, hey, check out Yona. I will also say, like, I loved Yona pretty immediately, but I will say that it may take a little while to connect to Yona as a character, because the first volume, she's very much traumatized and in shock and trying to get over the fact that, hey, one of the people I cared about the most murdered another person that I cared about the most. And now I've lost everyone who supports me except for one person. I've lost my home. Everyone thinks I'm dead. Where do I go from here? How do I survive this? And so the amount of growth that Yona herself makes over the course of the series is phenomenal. And I cannot reiterate enough how much I love this series and how much I feel like other people will love this series if you haven't tried it as of yet. Next is the newest volume of a super fun series currently running in, Jump Plus, but on Shonen Jump and other, their various app platforms. A series that I've been following via the app and definitely been enjoying a lot. And this is Volume 2 of Spy Family by Tatsuya Endo. This is so funny and sweet. So this is a comedy about a spy. So it's about two neighboring countries. This is not a realistic setting, but it's sort of like the two sides of Berlin, right? So there's the East and West Berlin, who are constantly at war, and there's always tensions between each other. And so we have a elite spy called Twilight who has been, doing his thing, being a spy in enemy territory for years and years. He's a master of disguise, just totally top of his game. And his current mission is to get close to a governmental leader, political leader, who, in order to, gain his trust and get information or whatever, spy stuff. But the only way he's this particular government officer or whatever is notoriously antisocial. He never goes to events or anything. He just never is seen in public. The only time he is ever seen out in public is when he's attending an event for his young son for school and things like that. So the mission is that Twilight, this spy, has to infiltrate this guy and gain, friendship and control and whatever of this guy through a child friendship, right? But obviously Twilight is an adult. He is a grown man. He can't pretend to be a child. So he has to adopt a child, enroll them in the same school, which is this elite private academy, encourage his adopted child to become friends with this boy, the son of this government guy, and somehow, and thus through their children, gain access to him. Only problem is that, he adopts this child, this little girl, Anya, here, who's on the cover, from the shady orphanage, and so he's like, okay, everything's going okay, but this elite school absolutely will not allow a child in who has a single parent household. So he also has to marry someone pretty quickly to become a perfect family unit. And so Twilight, who has now reinvented himself, his current cover is Lloyd Folger. He is a psychiatrist, I believe. Yes, psychiatrist. And his young daughter Anya. They have to find a mother for this group, and so kind of quickly he meets. He's like, no woman is gonna get married to me within a week, because that's when that's when enrollment starts for the school. Like, nobody in their right mind is going to do that. Until he comes across a young woman at a clothing store called Yor. She is she works in an office. She works in a government job, and through a series of events, he's like, oh yes, I'm single, and I'm looking. It's so hard being a single dad. I really wish that I had a mother for our daughter. Like, it's been so hard since my wife passed away or whatever. So he proposes. Well, a whole bunch of stuff happens. But he asks Yor to get married, and she agrees immediately because Lloyd doesn't know, or Twilight doesn't know, but that Yor is actually secretly living a double life, and she is an assassin for the government. So by day she works in an office, and sometimes she goes out and kills a whole bunch of people. And she needs cover. She needs cover because the fact that she's a young single woman is suspicious, and there's a very high possibility that her neighbors or her co-workers will report her to the secret police, that she is a spy, and she's not a spy, but she is an assassin, and so she doesn't want to get reported to the secret police. And so she agrees immediately because she needs cover, and with the idea of like, oh yes, I have a family and a relationship, and I'm well established. I'm not suspicious, I promise. And so this assassin and this spy quickly become a family with their adopted daughter, and those two the adults know nothing about the other, in regards to their secret lives. But their little girl, Anya, who is on the cover here, she knows everything. She knows everything that's going on because she can read minds. And so she's, first of all, she knows that her dad's a spy, and she thinks that's the coolest thing. She knows her mom's an assassin, and that's the coolest thing. And she knows that they both have like missions, and she doesn't want them to fail those, but also she doesn't want to lose her new family, and so she tries super duper hard to make sure that they don't find out about each other, and that everything's going smoothly, and that they can live a happy life as a cute little family together. Yeah. It's great. It's so funny. It's really heartwarming and sweet. If you like it, if you're someone who likes the fake dating to real dating, or like fake married to real married trope in fiction, this will absolutely be your thing. And the Folgers are great. I love this series so much, and Anya especially has like such funny reaction faces, and despite them being like such a weird mishmash of people and hiding everything about their real lives, I guess, they're also like, it's such a wholesome relationship. You want these two to things to work out, because whilst this might just be a mission for both of them, or a convenient excuse to get their actual jobs done, we know that perhaps there's something more, and perhaps there's potential for a future with these characters. But yeah, Spy Family, absolutely adorable. 100% recommend it. And if you're wanting more, if you've been buying the print releases and wanting more, this is one that is serialized and available on the Shonen Jump app, as well as Manga Plus. Yeah. Support it legally, please. And it's very, 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 very good. This is the most recent volume of another series that I absolutely love, and took a little while for me to get the prior volume, but this one I had pre-ordered, so I got it right away. And that is Requiem of the Rose King, Volume 13 by Iacano. This is a historical tragedy focused on the War of the Roses, and more specifically Richard III and Henry VI. So the War of the Roses, obviously, the Lancasters, and the my brain has forgotten. But like actual historical events, but this is very reliant on the Shakespearean plays of these historical figures, and it's a reimagining of those events. And our main character is Richard III, who is on the cover here, but not quite the Richard of history. Not so much in that he's not a tyrant, and that he's not, a bad person, because he definitely is. But more so because not everything is quite as it seems with Richard, and there's the ostracization of him from his family and things like that throughout the course of his life has a couple different other motives to it. It's great. It's really, really great. It is a Shakespearean tragedy. I don't know whether or not I doubt that this will have a happy ending, which makes it all that more like tense and heartbreaking to read. This has an upcoming anime adaptation as well, so hopefully that will encourage more people to read it, because I love this series a whole lot. Again, historical fiction, absolutely my thing, with a kind of I don't want to say a supernatural twist, but there's a ghostly, demonic, maybe, I don't know, Jeanne d'Arc in here, which it relates to Richard and his life, and more specifically gender and expectations of gender. I don't know how to explain it without giving it away, but this is not this is definitely not what happened, right? Like, what Shakespeare said happened didn't happen either. Like, this, you go into it with an expectation of, like, this is fictionalized for drama and sympathy, perhaps. But this is definitely not what happened. But regardless, it's still really interesting. Very dark political thriller. Lots of fighting, war. I mean, it was the War of the Roses. It was a big kerfuffle between two families in regards to the English throne. And yeah, I love it. Perhaps if you've read Iacano's other works, which is a complete, well, her most popular one, which is Ottoman, which is a completely different genre, it kind of has similar themes in regards to certain stuff. And I'm not going to say that all of her previous stuff isn't... I mean, Blank Slate, it's not great, but that also has a lot of violence and is kind of about a mysterious main character. So maybe that gives you an indication. I don't know. Requiem of the Rose King, personally, I find is the strongest out of all of Iacano's stuff. I did like Ottoman. It hasn't aged particularly well in some regards, but it's also very kind and nuanced in ways that were unexpected for shoujo series of that time. Anyway, that we're not talking about Ottoman. We're talking about Requiem of the Rose King. So I haven't read this one yet because I haven't had the chance to. I have like a couple volumes to read for this series, but I don't mind holding off and getting multiple volumes because I've read like over half of it. I've read like 10, 11 volumes of this series. I know that I love it. Like, I'm not going into this blind and just buying it because, I assume that I will like it. This series is one that it ticks so many boxes for me, and I I think that if you enjoy a series of this nature, then definitely give this one a shot, because it's super good and I'm not going to say fun, but it gives you everything that you want. And also, both Richard and Henry are really interesting characters. And you can recognize the historical figure that they are, or who historically we recognize as these people. But Kano has made these characters her own as well. Like, they're not, as I said, this is not what happened in real life. This is not a factual historical recounting of of British history. It's not. So don't go into it expecting that. But yeah, Requiem of the Rose King, absolutely worth reading. So that's the end of the normal manga, quote unquote. We have some, so first I have a Yuri title. I got 2 volumes from my local comic store, but and I did know this when I bought these ones, but I don't have the prior volume. So I have a 1 volume gap of what I had and then what I currently own. But I'll get it at some point. I'm really enjoying this series anyway. It's one that was recommended to me even prior to its licensing by my good friend Ray from Whimsical Pictures. And this is A Tropical Fish Yearned for Snow, volumes 4 and 5 by Makoto Hagino. This is a series about a high school girl who has recently moved to a small town, quiet seaside town, which is famous in real life. The school is famous for its aquarium club. And so, but in this manga, the aquarium club only has 1 member, and so she looks after all of the fish and marine life that they have living at the school. And our recent transfer is interested not so much in the marine life, but in this girl who has dedicated herself so much to the aquarium club and their friendship, and perhaps their something more relationship. This is definitely a slow burn Yuri. From what I have heard from Ray, like, it's not even necessarily obvious as to these characters will get together at the end, which may be frustrating for some readers, and I understand that. But it's just really sweet. There's a cute salamander, really cute salamander in this series. And although I haven't read these particular volumes, as I said, I'm missing volume 3. It's just been a really, really lovely time. Both of these characters and their friendship have really been wonderful to read about, and it's really sweet. It's a nice. I love a lot of Yuri series. I follow quite a few of them, but I've had a couple of my favorites recently end. So it's nice to have a newer series on the roster to be following. And of course we have so much in the pipeline coming as well. So sometimes it can be a little bit hard to figure out, like, which series you want to prioritize and even necessarily want to read. But this one has just been consistently really sweet and lovely, and it does make you want to continue reading it. I'm looking forward to getting volume 3 at some point so I can actually read this series like I should be, rather than just buying the volumes. But again, local comic store had it and I wanted to get it because I will be buying these at some point anyway, and they don't have a huge manga section at the store that I go to all the time, so I'd rather buy them when I see them rather than waiting and perhaps missing the book when it's available and then having to buy it online anyway. That just seems counterintuitive. So yeah, A Tropical Fish Yearns for Snow. really sweet, really lovely, and definitely a Yuri to keep your eye out for, especially if you're wanting to try something a little bit, I don't know, not a little bit different, but a little bit slower paced. It's definitely, as I said, definitely a slow burn. Or if you're just wanting to try the genre as well, it's pretty non-confrontational and just really lovely. Cute girls with their sweet friendship and perhaps more of a relationship development a little later down the line. So next is the final manga that I got for this month, also a BL title. This one has been out for a couple months. I didn't buy it on release date because this is a Tokyo Pop title. We know my back and forth with wanting to support titles that I want to read, obviously. Like, I will buy things that I like because I'm a good person and I like to legally support things. But I also dislike having to support Tokyo Pop. But we know that I'm not a hypocrite. I will buy a Tokyo Pop title if they've licensed something that I'm interested in. And unfortunately, they have licensed a lot of BL and Yuri, but mostly BL that I'm super interested in. So I've hit this conundrum, and this is one of their more recent BL titles, part of their Love line. And when it was licensed, I was like, okay, I didn't know anything about it, hadn't heard of it, don't know this mangaka, and so it wasn't like an immediate like pre-order for me or anything. But the thing is, I've recently gotten a couple BL titles from Tokyo Pop that I'd been interested in, and all of them were really good. Like, really good. Surprisingly really good. Some that I was expected to like, others that like really surprised me and I absolutely adore now. And this one was one that I had really good reviews from a lot of people, and the things that they were talking about that they liked from it were things that I like from BL series especially. And so I was like, oh god. So I decided to get this one, and I read it, and it is incredibly my thing. Gosh darn it, Tokyo Pop, stop doing this. Either that or boot out Stu Levy, because I hate the idea of supporting him. But anyway, so this is a single complete in one volume series, Dekoboko Sugar Days by Atsuko Yusen. Thick book, like quite thick. This is about two childhood friends who, so already my weakness. Childhood friends to lovers, already my weakness. So we have one of our characters, well, they met in childhood, obviously, after one of the characters, this one, saved the other character, this one, in their childhood. He fell into a drain, and he was crying, and couldn't get out on his own, and so our main character helped him out when they were really young, like 5-6 years old, and he was like, oh, this girl is so cute, fell in love immediately, first love, just heart stolen immediately. Helped this cute kid to get back home, where it is revealed that, oh wait, no, this is a little boy, and so his first love was like immediately crushed or heartbroken, right? Or at least that's what he says to himself, but we know, and he knows as well, that like maybe he's still, his first love, his big first crush is still burning pretty strong for this cute guy that he rescued in childhood, and they've been best friends ever since. And and so this other guy, he really respects his best friend. He aspires to be him. He sees him as definitely like his savior and like a prince and definitely like everything that is amazing, and he has real real respect for him, and real admiration for him. But it isn't until recently he's sort of come to realize that maybe his admiration and respect is a little bit more not that, and a little bit more romantic attraction and love. And so it's about these two basically like coming to terms with their feelings and then admitting it to each other, and then getting together. It's a 1-volume series. It's that it's exactly what you expect. Recognizing your feelings, admitting your feelings, profit. And we, as I said, we know that I am a big sucker for childhood friends to lovers. I just am. The best friends to lovers trope is my greatest weakness. And these two are really cute. The series does have explicit scenes in it, or it has sex in it, but it's not super explicit, is probably how I should phrase that. So you will get that satisfying ending if that's what you're wanting from the series. And dang it, both of these kids are so cute, in different ways. And their relationship is just really sweet, and you want them to do well, and you want their relationship to succeed. And because this is a 1-volume BL, you know that their relationship is going to succeed, and thus you can go into it knowing that you will at least get what you're expecting, hopefully. It's so cute. Look at it. I love the expressions. I think the art style just helps with the cuteness. I think that the way that they discuss each other's feelings and how the relationship develops is pretty great for this sort of story. It does obviously also focus on sexuality and intimacy, physical intimacy, and and something that, again, I always appreciate when a childhood friend to lover series tackles it, is the bridging that gap of like having been friends for so long. Now is it awkward if we have sex? Like how do we figure that out, and like taking that last step, and then the risk of like, well, if things don't work out, then maybe I lose my best friend. Dekoboko Sugar Days, so cute. I love this, and God damn it, Tokyo Pop! If you license more from this creator, hopefully, if other BL licensors, please listen to my plea. Please license more of this creator's titles. I think another one of their titles has been licensed from Tokyo Pop. I know another one of the mangaka, another title from the mangaka of Don't Call Me Dirty has been licensed, aside from Don't Call Me Daddy, but like a new one they just announced. I'm like, why? Because I really like that series. I really like that book way more than I expected to. And if you've been hearing positive things about the BL choices, at least from Tokyo Pop, they're nobody. I don't think anyone's lying to you. They're all really good. All of the ones that I've read so far have been really good, and I don't know what witchcraft Tokyo Pop has been doing, or more notably Stu has been doing, to still have connections in the Japanese publishing industry that will allow him to have good titles. But it's frustrating because obviously don't want to give Tokyo Pop my money unless they have some staff changes. Well, I say unless they have some CEO changes. But but I also, I'm not gonna not buy it, especially if it sounds like something that I would enjoy. And this one definitely sounded like one that I would enjoy, and I loved it a lot. So moral of the story is that I'm a big hypocrite when it comes to Tokyo Pop, but it's a personal struggle that I will struggle with until things hopefully change for the better from them, because I don't inherently want Tokyo Pop to fail, but I do want them to take responsibility for the amount of chaos and just bad business practices that they have had in the past, and the amount of creators and others that they've screwed over prior to their rejuvenation this past year and a half. Yeah, anyway, Dekaboko Sugar Days is really sweet. And if you're not struck by the moral quandary that I am when it comes to Tokyo Pop, and you like BL, then check this one out. Home stretch, people. Only 2 more things to talk about. So first up is a light novel series. This is the most recent volume of the series. It's my favorite light novel series. Yeah, definitely top 3. It's probably my number 1 though. And I've been anxiously awaiting this volume for a while. I didn't really read the previous volume until relatively recently, but this is volume 14 of Baccano. The subtitle is 1931, Another Junk Railroad Special Express, which I presume, going from this cover, talks about some additional stuff that was related to the Flying Pussyfoot incident of 1931, and includes these characters, Chane and Claire and Jacuzzi and Nice and Rachel, and looks like Fiera's there. Fiera didn't have much to do with that, but Chez is there, Lad's there, Graham's there, and it looks like Isaac and Miria are in the forefront here. So that's exciting. One of the best arcs in the series is the Flying Pussyfoot incident, because I love Baccano, and I love all of its crazy characters. I love the anime, I love the novels, and I highly recommend the novel series if you are also someone who enjoyed the anime. Not only because they get really lovely hardcover releases from Yen Press, but it's also, Baccano, the anime is great, don't get me wrong, but it only ever got the 16 episodes, or the 13 episodes plus the 3 OVA episodes of the original run. That was all it ever got. It's a great series, but that's all it ever got. Comparatively to Durara, which is kind of its sister series, that has those novels are completed in English. They're also good, but I also find the characters in that a little less interesting. The modern day Japanese setting is a little less interesting. It's not a bad series, but it's certainly a hugely popular series, and I think perhaps maybe the expectation from that, because of ardent fans of the series, now hasn't aged super. I don't know. But that series got a complete adaptation. Like, all 13 novels got adapted to anime throughout the 2, technically 4 seasons of the anime. Baccano, there's so much more additional content in the novels. They're quite well written. I've said this before, but light novels are never going to be like literary genius, especially some of the current stuff that's coming out that starts as web published titles, and that's not to knock web publishing, don't get me wrong, but light novels I see as generally being like a middle grade level reading level. They're not meant to be overcomplicated. They're not meant to have like super complex themes. They're light novels are light novels. You read them on the train. They're a bit of light reading whilst you're getting around, and it's fun for that 2 hours or that afternoon that you spend on it, and that's it. But the difference of a series that's published in a magazine initially, or has a publisher attached to it from the get-go, like with Bakuno and Durara and most of Narita's works, versus the current trend of online publication on Naro and other such online platforms. WordPress is kind of the English equivalent, but most of that's used for fan fiction, and we know that's how you have to think about it, right? So self-published and web-published titles are not inherently bad, but because it's a low bar platform and anyone can publish anything on there if they wish, if they've created content and they want to share it, then of course you're gonna get stuff that's not super great, and even that not super great stuff can get hugely popular and spark a super huge franchise. Like Ascendance of a Bookworm originally published on the web. It's completed, but it started its life on the web, and I love that series. I love it a whole bunch. But that's one of the better ones compared to some of the other stuff, which is either exactly what you expect, just very tropey, not super well written because the person writing it hasn't had any editorial direction, and they're an amateur, and that's fine because they're publishing for themselves online for people to read in the same way that fan fiction or original fiction is also. And when you think of in English terms, there's stuff that's published online that I'm sure is good. Honestly, fan fiction, the level of writing skill in fan fiction can be amazing, better than published books. Honestly, better than published books in certain cases. But then you also get stuff like After, or any of the hundreds of thousands of Wattpad original stories where a teenage girl has name changed one of the One Direction boys and just created her own story with the self-insert so she can fall in love with Harry Styles. And that's not bad. That's not a wrong thing to do. But I think most people can agree After isn't a piece of literary brilliance. And I don't think it was ever meant to be, but that got picked up by a publisher, and that has movies and stuff like that. Just because, and it's not that it's bad or it's wrong or anything, but that's also, and 50 Shades of Grey is another perfect example. Just because something's hugely popular and has been adapted into something also doesn't mean that it's good, right? Or that when it was originally released that it was of a professional level quality. We know that this is the case. 50 Shades of Grey, the original Masters of the Universe fan fiction, is very poorly written when it comes to actual plot structure and writing style and structure and all of these things, and After as well. But the difference is 50 Shades of Grey was written by an adult woman, which, again, totally fine, and good on her for all of her success. Whereas After, I'm pretty sure, a lot of these stories are written by teenage girls in their bedroom, who, again, are doing the wish fulfillment thing. And light novels, to a certain extent, is that. The authors of those might tend to be a little bit older than the fan fiction crowd or the English original fiction crowd, or the Wattpad crowd, I should say. But the style of writing is quite similar. In that the level of freedom to just put anything you want down on paper without the expectation of like this has to be perfect because it's being submitted to a publisher and so I can't have any mistakes, and that there's going to be a rigorous editing process of 5-10 times going through it and just rewriting things and changing things and making this plot structure work, maybe changing the complete different point of view. Writing is a skill and definitely a process with multiple people involved. Whereas when you self-publish online, it's a different ballpark. And that's why, and again, so back to my point is that Baccano, being prior to this era of online publication, does have a little bit more literary style or writing style, writing finesse and skill versus some of the other stuff that we're seeing licensed in English and published in Japanese that didn't have those other people involved with the publication before it was finished and before it got later picked up for license. Anyway. Baccano, really great. Love this series. If you're not familiar with what Baccano is, I should have said this in the prior 10 minutes, but it is a supernatural historical fiction set in 1930s Prohibition era USA, following multiple characters, many of those who are in the Camorra and the Mafia and other various organizations. There's bootleggers, there's there's a lot of different groups. Like with a lot of Naruto's titles, there's so many characters, and every new book you're introduced to more characters. So, there's a cast of thousands with Naruto. But also, so this is kind of where the supernatural aspect comes into it. 300 years prior, a group of alchemists traveled from Italy, Europe in general, to the New World to escape persecution. On their ship ride to America, they summon the devil. And gain the elixir to immortality. So there are multiple characters, immortal characters, in this series that have been alive for 300 years. And in the first Baccano novel, we have other current day, quote-unquote, characters, those who were born and exist in the 1930s, who get caught up in this immortality thing because one of the survivors of this immortality experiment originally has created a new immortality liquid. So now we have other immortals. And it's great. It's great if you like gang warfare, mafia warfare, as it were, and lots of action, lots of crazy characters, lots of really distinct personalities, a lot of like weird kooky alchemical stuff, homunculi, immortality, all this stuff. Check out Baccano. It's a wild ride. Certainly lives up to its name, which I believe Baccano in Italian means rowdy. And I mean, it's very intentional, obviously, that our general pilgrims or alchemists came from Italy, and generally in the 1930s the mafia were Italians. So yeah, it's good. It's very, very good. I like the New York and Chicago generally setting, and it's a fun time. And it's personally my favorite of Naruto's works, and I always look forward to when we get a new volume of this. Oh my goodness. Finally, we reach the end, and this is a book, Bubbles publication book, actually. So longtime viewers may be aware that I very often buy the Bubbles fanzine, which is a really, really wonderful fanzine about comics and publishing and manga and translation and all sorts of cool things. But so with their recent zines and like several months ago, I pre-ordered this book. It's their first like book that they've done, because I was very interested in it, and I haven't really sat down to read the full thing as of yet, but was super excited to get it. And this is The Translator Without Talent by Ryan Holmberg, aka at Mangaberg. So Ryan Holmberg is a professional translator, a Japanese to English translator. I presume perhaps maybe the other way. I don't know. He's done work for Drawn and Quarterly, generally, as I think where most of his body of work comes from. I think at the end it shows all of the titles that he's translated throughout his career. Picture box stuff, and then Breakdown Press, and then Drawn and Quarterly is sort of more his recent stuff. So not necessarily the stuff that he's you can see there's like a lot of Gekiga manga, a lot of indie manga, not stuff that's mainstream necessarily. But so Holmberg had a personal crisis where he felt like he hit just kind of the worst part of his career. He made a super huge mistake in his eyes when translating a series that he was really passionate about, an artist he absolutely adored, and who he like kind of dedicated his career around. And nobody really saw the issue. He didn't see a problem. The publisher didn't see a problem. Readers didn't really see a problem, except for the only one who did and called attention to it and didn't see it as a problem, but asked the question of like why he didn't translate a haiku as a haiku when in English, who is the actual publisher of this book after the fact, which led him to having this like crisis of faith in his own skills, and self-doubt. So he Holmberg kind of took a lot of time off and, had this personal struggle. And in the year or so that this was happening, he decided to make, I don't quite remember how it happened, but he started doing a daily Instagram diary, talking about various mangaka and their works and translation and the cultural impact of some titles and all of these and did it every day for I think a year, and gained a huge interest, a huge following from that. And this is the collection of those Instagram posts and what he had to say, and it's a really interesting, obviously the date that these were posted, and it's a really interesting insight from someone who is obviously involved with this, but also knows the culture behind a lot of these works, these creators, and why they may be so important, highlighting to people who probably hadn't heard of some of these creators before, giving them more recognition in English, and obviously working through his other translation work that he was doing at the same time for other publishers. It's really, 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 really good, and really interesting. Obviously, a lot of focus on Gekiga and classic stuff, indie stuff, underground comics, and I think there's also essay in here. I can't quite remember. But yeah, you can see like these are the creators generally that Holmberg focused on. You may be familiar with Suge Yoshiharu. Yokoyama Yuichi is maybe those are the more obvious. Baron Yoshimoto has had a couple things recently being released in English, and again, these are all creators who he worked on their actual works. Like he translated a lot of their series to English. So it's if you like translation, if you're interested in this sort of thing, give it a check out. It's I got it from Bubbles' store. I think you can find it at a couple like indie comic stores. I think if I remember correctly, Glacier Bay Books had some copies on their online store. The Canadian one that I can never remember the name of. I'm pretty sure they also had some copies. It's, if you're in indie manga or like alt manga circles or small print publisher circles or small press circles, I should say, then you may be aware of this. Otherwise, this is a surprise or something you didn't know about. It is one that is obviously a collection of Instagram posts, and perhaps maybe you'd be just more interested in scrolling through the Instagram at Mongenberg. But I think it's nice to have a permanence to social media posts versus just kind of relying on these things to be available 5-10 years down the line, because there's a lot of valuable information in this, and maybe you want to go back to it or read it in the future, and if it's not there anymore, that's an unfortunate consequence of how technology on online spaces and digitization works. But yeah, Translator Without Talent, definitely worth the read, and really happy to have gotten my copy, especially because, as I said, I pre-ordered it. I got it relatively quickly, in regards to when it was released, but it was I did pre-order way a long time ago. So you kind of forget about it, and then just when it arrives, you're like, yeah, hey, that's exciting. So yeah. That's everything that I got for this month. So many more books than I expected, and that was partially fueled by my own spending at the local comic store, partially fueled by so many interesting debuts starting recently, and finally getting my own copies of those. I've been talking for so long, my throat's starting to hurt. But let me know your guys' thoughts on any of the titles that I talked about today. Have you read any of the new titles that I got? Whether they be debuts or ongoing series. Let me know your opinions on especially the debuts. I think it's exciting when there's a lot of new stuff being released in English, but it's also really hard to keep up. The persistent problem with being a fan of multiple genres and manga licensors just being really cool and licensing a whole bunch of stuff that you're interested in. It's a good problem to have, I think. I shouldn't be complaining. I'd much prefer this compared to the alternative. But yeah, I don't want to bore you too much with this ending. Let me know as well. I've recently posted an Artbook overview of it was the Hanako-kun Artbook. That's a different style to Artbook overview than I've done in the past, but I do think it's probably a little bit better of a style. It's also easier for me to make, and I have quite a few of those in the pipeline to post. Let me know your thoughts if you've seen those, if you like it or dislike it. I also last week, or over the weekend, posted the most recent episode of the podcast, which was focused on Natsume Onna. That is Read Right to Left, where I talk manga with my very good friend Ray from Whimsical Pictures. Typically we talk about a particular genre or creator. Sometimes we do a series-specific spotlight. And both of us really appreciate all of you who have been listening to the podcast until now, thus far. And also, so that's available here on my channel as well as on podcasting platforms. So that might be a bit more convenient for folks. I also have a whole bunch of first impressions to post, including first impressions for all of the titles that I talked about today. And also, finally, just as a reminder, and perhaps maybe of interest to people, every week, it's a Saturday, well, it's Saturday, I think, for everyone, but Saturday Eastern Standard Time, 10 a.m., that's U.S. Eastern Standard Time, I have a live stream. It's typically about an hour and a half, where I do my weekly wrap-up. I talk about all of the titles that I've been reading that week. I try to, nowadays, I'm start with the novels, which I know that, like, just general novels, I know that not everyone's super interested in those, but that kind of gets it out of the way, and it also allows people to come in later, not right on, like, 10 o'clock on the dot, and listen to me talk about some manga. I talked about a lot of manga this week or last week I should say, because I didn't read any novels aside from one light novel. So if you're interested in first impressions of titles that I've recently been reading, then you can catch me there. It is live. I do try to interact with everyone who's in the comments. And 10 o'clock a.m. for the US, or the East Coast of the US, is 11 p.m. my time. So maybe it's unfortunate that it's the end of the day and I'm kind of, like, winding down. And it does sometimes mean that I have lost my mind just talking about some of these things. Because I'm going to be real, that I've read some frustrating things recently. But also some really exciting things. So maybe it's just pure entertainment, comedy-wise, to watch me babble about certain things on a live stream. And if you are interested, check them out. But I do, and I'm sure people are aware that I do keep them up, available on the channel, so you can watch them after the fact if you can't make it for that time slot. I know I try to make it the most convenient for everyone, kind of the least convenient for me, right? 11 p.m. isn't necessarily when I'd want to start a live stream, but I do know that most of my viewers aren't in my time zone, so I don't say I never do anything for you guys, because I try to accommodate everyone as best I can. But yeah, I think that's all the housekeeping that I need to talk about. Yeah, let me know your thoughts and feelings on any of these titles. Oh, also, as always, my Twitter is in the description below. You can follow me there. I'm on quite often, a lot of the time, and I tweet about manga stuff generally. It's almost 100% manga, sometimes anime, but usually my nerdy hobbies and, licensing stuff and whatever else. So if you are wanting to follow me there, feel free to do so. Also, if you're wanting to get in contact with me directly, you can do so that way. And yeah, that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will catch you in the next video. Bye till then.